Previously on the Seventh Valkyrie, Meridia is stonewalled at every turn as she tries to spearhead her response against the Machine King. But forces beyond her are beginning to move, and as the night rolls on, she may be swept up by unexpected faces, both old and new. Find out more next on the Seventh Valkyrie. A light corps soldier in uniform tended to cut through crowds quickly, but with Meridia's eyes flaming almost as brightly as her hair in the late afternoon sun, she made her way to her quarters in record time. There, she paused only to change into civilian clothes before setting out towards the dockfront bars. Meridia did not drink, did not smoke, did not consume any substance that would not further her own health and ability. The Light Corps standards for fitness and strength were absurd, and while many of her brothers and even some of the pre-war sisters could manage them while also partaking in a lifestyle of casual drug and drink, Meridia was not so gifted. Still, she liked the atmosphere of the docks. They reminded her of home at the rivers on the edges of the wildlands, where she had spent many a night sitting happily at the bar next to her father, listening to the stories of men who had come in from their journeys all around the country. The men and scattered women there were more down to earth, simpler of heart and of mind, and it was always a comfort after a day spent among the officers, the merchants, the lawmen, the officials, to meet some true, honest, good people. Down on the docks, the glow of Light Corps recognition faded, leaving Meridia the comfort of just a little bit of anonymity. There were still some men stationed on the walls, who had been added there since Reen had been moved to high alert, who might have recognized her, but everybody else just saw a tall, well-built girl with fiery red hair wandering the streets close to dark. Meridia was okay with that, despite the fact it came with a different kind of attention. She had never been exceptionally beautiful by conventional standards, and really often rolled her eyes at any woman who felt the need to be such a way. Meridia was built solidly, with shoulders as broad as many men, and a sturdy frame now packed with the muscle required to handle the requirements of Light Corps life. Even as a young woman, she'd been told often that she would run a good home or keep a farm in line, thinly veiled insults. But to some of the new men arriving off the boat, those exact plain features made her seem attainable. And with the barges full of men to build the bridges, as well as soldiers shipped in to enforce its building, all of a sudden her trek slowed through crowds of men, alternating between thinly veiled threats, cooing calls, or in-depth descriptions of exactly what they do to her and where. And yet for all that, it was still better than being with the officers. Meridia pressed on, only stopping once to break all of a man's fingers when he decided that a wandering hand between her legs was just what she'd been waiting for. Prick would think twice before copping a feel again, or at least she hoped, as his whimpering screams filled the air, and she slipped back into the crowd towards the Salty Lass. The Salty Lass was a particular favorite of Meridia's, partially because it was rarely busy, but mostly because Greta, the tavern's mistress, was as tough as any sailor or dock worker she'd ever seen, with a tongue to dance circles around the best of them. But with all the men in from the barges, even the Salty Lass was nearly full to the brim. Greta and her team were rushing around as quickly as they could, serving overfull tables of newcomers and reassuring the regulars that they weren't being overlooked. But it was chaos. Greta stopped to offer a warm look to Meridia as she made her way past the bar, who dodged the passing hands and fired discreet elbows and fists into anyone who thought to grab more. As Meridia passed Mock, the bartender, she stepped into the back to pull her favorite bar stool around, perching in the corner and nodding to the overworked man with an understanding glance. In time, her krasa came. It was a special, a sturdy, thickened tea so spiced and tart that few people ever dared drink it. But it cleared your head, sent a shock and a tingle down your spine, had incredible rejuvenative properties, and required slow enough sipping that it would kill an hour or so while Meridia worked it down. But a little less than an hour later, the bar had gotten even more full, and Greta came round to stop in front of Meridia, wiping away the sweat streaking her brow. Well, damn shit, Riddy. Doesn't look like this flood's stopping anytime soon. I'm a batting down the motherfucking hatches. I'm planning on bringing the girls in so they're not out wandering the floor while these guys are getting handsy and starting to stick hands and fingers where they shouldn't be. Instead, what we'll do is I'll set up a few of the regulars with a few free beers, let them dole out the brews, and tap into a few of the older kegs I got back there. These dumb motherfuckers don't have a shit what they could taste. They're all just here to get plastered. You need help? Meridia asked. With anything. Security running the bar, lifting anything. I can go beat the shit out of a few guys out there if you want. I'd fucking love to see you try, and actually I'd love to see you fucking do it. I know you could, but I need you to head on home, because... Greta stopped, pausing as she saw Meridia's temper flare. Up, come on, Riddy. I know you're a firecracker, and you know how men can get around you. Little pussy-ass dogs don't like a big bad bitch. It reminds them they're all bark, and sometimes that gets them acting all fucking crazy like they could snap and do some shit they're gonna regret. And I don't want you killing nobody, and I don't want you getting hurt. Besides, I was actually gonna ask if you could walk all the girls home. I'd feel more comfortable if it was you. Could you help me out? Meridia's temper still flared. Regardless of the reasons behind Greta's decision, she would have preferred to beat the shit out of every entitled prick in the bar who made the girls uncomfortable. This was their home, not some fucking meat market. But, letting out a breath, she nodded. All right, Meridia said. I'll do it for you. Thank you, Greta murmured. Your cross is on me, and the rest of the month, too. I'll host a regs-only night. Keep an eye out for a close front with a candle in the top right. Who knows how long these Mandarian boys gonna be here, but when they do, they fuck shit up. Meridia nodded. You're a motherfucking lifesaver, BC, thank you. And here, slip out the back, I'll have the girls meet you. And then Greta was off again, back into the frenzy. Meridia walked most of the girls home, keeping an eye on them through the crowds and using her strength to step in where the new soldiers grew too thick. But in all, they were able to get home without incident. Still, as Meridia returned to her own home, she was gritting her teeth at the pricks who'd taken over her bar just on the day she needed that space to decompress. To make things worse, on her walk home it became apparent from the accents and the droves of men moving into barracks that most of the soldiers were from Central, which just added to the pot boiling in the new city. Central soldiers, well, anyone from close to the capital could range from being insufferable to outright hostile, viewing the people of the outer regions as simpletons in the best case and in the worst case as thwarp sympathizers. Fucking pricks. If they knew what it was like to live on the edges of the free lands, where the force of the Edoran army was far away, and an uneasy peace with the thwarps was a way of life to survive, they would have had a different tune. As she got home, Meridia lit 2 torches on either end of her back porch, and grumpily went into her long process of evening exercises. First was a system of grueling strength training, an extra regimen she performed each evening to meet the Light Corps requirements. There had been no scales or adjustments for female strength and mobility, so she had to match up with any men and their strength. By the time the long process of strength training had finished, she shifted to her technical exercises, working with her 2 gauntlet-mounted blades through a continuous, complex series of different movements. There wasn't nearly enough distance in her backyard to train with her bow, at least not meaningfully, so she made up the difference with excessive training of every technique, practice, and skill that she could learn with hand-to-hand combat. Back in Mandus, she'd had partners to spare, but here things were different. Women were already a rarity in Edora's fighting troops, but if they'd been hard to find in Mandus and Reen, they were non-existent. During the day, Meridia brought her breakfast, lunch, and usually her dinner out to the training yards, spending every free moment training. And apart from the few times Chaden had crossed blades with her, she spent more days than most drilling alone. And it wasn't just because of Meridia's prickly temper and the intimidating nature of the Light Corps. Meridia heard the whispers, heard the snide comments, the sly attempts to undercut her, the excuses and the limits and the whatabouts when she beat their best fair and square. But no matter how many restrictions she agreed to, no matter how many hoops she jumped through, no matter who she fought against and beat, the whispers never stopped. And eventually any potential training partners were either humiliated, unable to keep up, were bullied by their friends into avoiding her. At a sudden sound, Meridia froze in place and then whipped both of her blades towards the garden wall in the fading light, watching them meet the wood and bury into the neck and chest areas where an intruder might have come. But there was no one there. Meridia scanned all four corners and found no evidence of anyone. She could have sworn she heard something on the rooftops or running along the walls. Probably just a rat. She was jumpy when she was irritable. The cold winter breeze picked up again, and Meridia noted the sweat drenching her body. The sun had long since faded from the sky, and her muscles ached from the hours of training. Returning to the water pumps, Meridia bathed, donned fresh night clothes, and made her way to her small study, covered by documents, scraps of information, messages, theories, and notes. A small portion of the files were cases she had closed as a military investigator in Mandus, before she had made the jump to the Light Corps, and they served as reminders to Meridia of all the dangerous criminals she had killed or captured, mysteries she had solved. And above them all, mounted in the wood, was the metallic symbol of the Iron Wolf, a carving of his helm howling at the moon laid against the mark of 3 jagged claws. Compared to what he had done for the Eterans, the small numbers of cases and ongoing theories were a fraction, but they were a reminder that she had done good, that she had done a small portion to live up to the Wolf's legacy, and that kept her moving forward even in the darkest times, no matter how much people tried to cut her down. Scanning the study, she glanced across a few files, scanning the new reports she'd been able to get a copy of. The last few occurrences of the Machine King's symbol. Nothing the man, or organization, or entity, whatever the Machine King was, ever made any sense. There was no clear motive, there was no structure, no cohesiveness of strategy, at least to an outside eye. He had no clear cause, not yet, just effects. No history, no origin, no reason to exist. It was like the Machine King had just popped into the world at the end of the war. Or I guess he could just not exist, Meridia said, then resisted the urge to spit. Meridia had seen ritualistic killings in the outer rings of Mandus marked with Machine King's symbols. She had seen entire criminal organizations evaporate practically overnight, right as Eterran forces had gotten close to tracking them. And all that was left behind were the mutilated bodies of informants, the people they'd had on the inside. Once, they had even captured someone said to have had direct contact with the Machine King. The captive had been a squirrely girl who'd spent the vast majority of her time in captivity talking to the wall, begging and pleading for her life. And when the investigators had returned the next day, all they'd found was a headless corpse and a still-locked, windowless cell covered in fragments of skull and chunks of brain. Whether man or myth, the very idea of the Machine King had power, and with that specter looming over Reen, it was worth paying attention. But after a few more minutes of staring at the notes, trying to make some sense of the documents, she slapped the folder closed in frustration. Her eyes were glazing over and blurry, and where her brain usually filled in gaps with theories, she just found herself reading the reports over again. It was too late, and she was too tired to make any real progress, so she stretched and turned from the room, blowing out the candle. That night, Meridia awoke to the howl of the wolves in the hills far beyond the old city, but there was something off about it. It sounded little different than any other wolf, but despite the distance, it was like the beast in question was howling right across the street. Then the dogs of the city began to call out in response, until the night was filled with barking hounds. It would be normal to roll over and go back to sleep. This wouldn't have been the first time that had happened. But just underneath the howl of the wolves and the hounds, as it faded, Meridia heard the sound of a creaking floor. Her creaking floor. Snapping awake, she grabbed her blades where they always rested, holstered within reach, and leapt to her feet quietly. As silently as she could, she crept back down the stairs, throwing knives ready the entire way. She covered all of her angles as she turned around the banister into the sitting room, covered all of the corners and closets, and then headed towards her study, peeking around the corner to find no one there. Nothing except for the gentle sway where the curtains drifted in the evening breeze. She hadn't left the window open. Had she? It wasn't impossible. She often left them open to keep the home cool. But she was sure she hadn't that night. Mostly sure. Eyeing the window, she crept to look outside, listening for the howl of wolves, for any sign of an intruder. But now there was nothing. Nothing but the breeze of the coming winter. Closing the window, Meridia returned to the desk, glancing over the gathered evidence in the moonlight. The ratty tangle was different than it had been, she was sure. There was nothing missing, nothing taken, but something was out of place. It just felt off. She was sure of it. Her mind raced through the possibilities. Yosin's men? He didn't think she was worth the time of day, but it was possible. The Machine King's forces? That thought chilled her, but if they had found her, they had points of contacts close to Meridia, and she could flip that. There were other options, too. The Mandarians that had come today on the barges, and there could have been thieves or spies there, looking for info on the Light Corps. It wasn't impossible either. It could have even just been a burglar. Deterred by the lack of obvious valuables and spooked when Meridia had woken. There were too many unknowns to be sure. For a little peace of mind and some relaxation, she locked the windows, the doors to her room, everything. But it was all in vain. She was up anyway, watching, waiting. Want to know what happens next? Join us on Patreon to become a hero of Edera and get early access to episodes along with bonus features, director's commentary, and the full Tab to archive. You can also find other ways to support us at the links in the description, and we will see you next week.